Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, James shares his non-traditional path from the University of Georgia to working at UBS in investment banking once he graduated. We'll hear about a big risk he took delaying graduation, how he recovered when he was forced to finish his analyst stint early, and why he ended up back in IB at Lazard a few years later before finally making the transition to private equity. Enjoy. All right, James, welcome to the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So it'd be great if you could just give the listeners a short summary of your bio.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I grew up in Atlanta, went to the University of Georgia. After that, I worked at UBS in investment banking. I also worked at Lazard in investment banking. And on the private equity side, I've worked at Excel KKR and now a firm in LA called Diversus Capital. All pretty much, I guess, either tech or software sort of focused. I just started my second year as an associate at my company there in LA.
Cool. And so you've been out of school for about 5 years, right? Give or take.
I do the math. Yeah, that's about
Almost
right.
5 years. Crazy how time flies, right? I just turned 41 yesterday, so I'm like a ancient for startup land in Silicon Valley. But anyways, so let's go back all the way to undergrad and just hear a little bit about what kind of drew you to finance. Was it always kind of on the horizon? Do you have family in the business? How did you end up there?
No, honestly, no real connections. I really didn't even know about investment banking for, I'd say, the majority of my college career until kind of the last bit where I really had to hustle. And initially, I think I was just watching, I really liked the show Suits. And so I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I thought I'd become a corporate lawyer or at least try. And I guess at UGA, at least, what I noticed is that when I was taking my finance classes, all the kind of top kids in those classes were all getting these jobs. These, I guess, pretty coveted roles, in my opinion, at least at that time, especially. And they were going from the finance programs into these bulge bracket banks. And I said, okay, this is something I should look into. And I think that's what sort of caught my eye, just seeing people that I kind of respected pursuing something that, seemed like a pretty difficult to achieve goal. And that's what initially attracted me to it. And so.
And what year was that, would you say? Was that like junior year by that point?
It was junior year. So I was already behind, way behind. And at that time I had no internships.
So your resume was like pretty blank. You had a lot of good athletic stuff, and it sounds like your GPA was super high. So you had that going for you.
Yeah, fortunately, my GPA I had going for me. I guess athletics for what that counts, but as soon as I kind of figured out what the credentials were to getting the job, I just sort of started stacking up as many internships as I could, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And I even extended my graduation a year to kind of buy me some more time.
Oh, cool. Yeah, we can talk about that decision because I think there's a lot of people in that seat where they get to junior year and they're just like, especially now, it's like even earlier than when you were there. And so they get there and there's just no seats and they're like, wait a second, how is this already done?
Right.
Or I'm almost 2 years away from graduating.
Yep.
So tell me a little bit about it sounds like kind of junior year, you started saying, okay, this finance thing's interesting. And you talked about stacking internships. Tell me how you kind of first landed that first internship and how you managed to do it kind of during the year.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess thinking back, it was my junior year, second semester. And I had no internships, but there was this local investment bank in Athens called Frisch Capital Partners. Athens is where Georgia is.
Mm-hmm.
And all the guys in our finance club, not all the guys, but a lot of people intern there. They all seem to be able to secure kind of these bulge bracket offers. And so I honestly just pinged him a bunch of times. And this doesn't always work, but frankly, he said no the first few times. And then eventually called me back and just asked me if I wanted to grab coffee. And then I started an internship there that day. And so that was, I'd say, my first exposure to any sort of transaction or deal type
When you said you messaged him, how many times did you message him before giving up, and how far apart did you put that? Was it like every week you were hitting him up, or was it like every like 3 weeks, 4 weeks?
I'd say for a good. So first, I emailed him twice and he didn't answer me, so I just called him
Yeah.
and left him a voicemail. And then I emailed him one more time. Or then he responded to my email saying, it's probably not going to work. He's already kind of filled up. And then I sent him one more follow up email, kind of saying, explaining myself, explaining kind of what I was looking to get out of it, and if there's any exception he could make, obviously that's great. If not, then I'll stop pestering him. And fortunately, I guess after the fourth contact, he just responded in a positive way.
Do you think it was like the way you framed it? Like, I'll stop bothering you, kind of a little more relaxed, like you showed persistence, but you were kind of ready to back off? Or what do you think kind of, you can always fit one more intern, right? It's kind of like one of those things. So just the way you came across, you thought was good in that email?
I don't know. I think it was the content of my first few emails and probably just throughout the entire dialogue that helped kind of explain why it was so important to me and what I was looking to get out of it.
What did you say? Do you remember? Or can you pull it up? Because
It
this is like,
might
no, because
take a
like
minute.
a lot of kid, yeah, a lot of kids like they just don't know exactly how to phrase things and like how, you know,
Right,
the
right.
reality is you just needed that first internship, right? To even have
Yeah.
something for your resume. So how honest were you with that?
Yeah, no, I totally, I explained to him kind of my vulnerabilities and my strengths. I said, look, like, I really want this. It's an uphill battle. I have no internships yet. I have a good GPA. I've been involved in sports and I've kind of worked, to help, I guess, make money during college. And I just didn't quite understand what it took or what was required to get into this. And, I could work any hours, like whatever time for free. Um, I think I even like made a joke, like I'd even do his laundry or something like that. Um, but yeah, I think I just explained my situation and I wasn't afraid to say that I didn't have any experience, but I was willing to learn and eager to do it.
That's great. I love it. That tends to get a really good response if you like kind of make a humble joke, and if there's any room for you, they'll tend to make room. And even if there's not, sometimes they'll like find a friend that could give you an internship. I put it in quotes because oftentimes they'll just let you put stuff on your resume that helps open those doors.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So how did that go? Did you actually do laundry, or was there any good work?
Yeah, I mean, it was great. So it's kind of funny. Like I see why he makes it kind of, so I don't want to say selective, but he doesn't take on that many because his office is basically out of his house. And he does work on deals. He works on, I guess, a good bit of deals. And a lot of it, I think he kind of got to that age where he wanted to kind of like pay it forward or pay it backward, I guess, a little bit. Um, and part of the internship, the first 2 hours, he would just teach us things. I mean, he wouldn't even be working on things that were making him money. He'd just be like, "This is what this works. I mean, or this is what this means." I mean, he was like, "This is what EBITDA means. Like, this is how leverage works, whatever it is, right?" I mean, he just kind of gave a little boot camp every time you came in, which is, I mean, in hindsight, I don't know if there are very many people, that do that. So
For sure. That's awesome for interns. Like it's his own business and he's kind of taking time out to train the interns
yeah,
a little bit.
yeah.
So
So
how big was the group? Like three, four of you at a time?
yeah, it was about three interns every Monday, Wednesday, Friday that would go in and we'd all kind of work and then
Cool.
get taught by Bob.
Sounds fun. So that's kind of spring. So what do you do? What's the plan for the summer? It's, junior summer is a critical summer.
Yeah, so I did that for about a year, and then I took a semester off to stack internships. Actually, uh, I guess I'll preface this by saying this is a risk that I took. I don't know if it's always going to pay off, but I figured it was the only way. So I took a semester off in the fall and basically stacked internships. So I was working there at that boutique investment bank, and then I also picked up this internship in Atlanta at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. So basically, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'd work in Athens, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays, I would commute to Atlanta and do that internship. So by the time recruiting came around, right, I had two, I guess, somewhat okay internships, which is what I needed. Then I also tutored student athletes at Georgia, which was also on my resume. But those were the three kind of things um, that I was, that I put on my resume that helped me kind of break in.
So you're saying you took the fall senior year off?
Yeah, and I remember I said I took a fifth year as well.
Yeah, you did a full, but was it a full year or you just did an extra, tacked on an extra semester at the end and like graduated in December
I tacked on an extra semester at the end.
and graduated early, basically,
Yep.
or
Yep.
in the winter. Okay. So you're interesting. Okay. So I want to hear how this works out because not a lot of people are willing to actually like completely change their college schedule because it's scary, right? What everyone else is doing. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd love to hear just, okay, so you had that full year, then you stacked it with that other internship. So now your resume is filling out a little bit and you're going into kind of now the beginning of your senior year, but recruiting's already passed, right? You're like middle the way through the year, kind of what would it be? It would be like the winter. But I guess tell me how you kind of thought through that whole process of like, hey, I'm going to delay for one semester. Did you feel like you might miss a window?
Well, no. So I guess when this happened, right, it was I guess junior year, spring semesters when I started, right. So by the summer, I had about 6 months of an investment banking internship, right. And then I did that throughout the summer, and then when fall hit, right, that's kind of when recruiting starts, I guess.
Yep.
But during then at least, 5 years ago, recruiting extended several months, right. I mean, even up till November, December.
Yeah.
And so during the first semester, right, that fall semester, I was working both jobs. And during, while I was working, I guess while during my internship at the SEC is when I started interviewing.
Got it.
So
And this
it's
is for
just
full-time roles?
no, this is for
This
internships.
is for internships the following
Yeah,
summer, but you would have been you never really had never really had an internship, a junior summer internship. This was for like a junior summer internship equivalent
exactly. So I was interviewing for junior summer internships as a senior.
as a senior who had delayed a semester.
As a
So
senior, exactly.
so
Yeah,
you were like willing to not only to do the delay, but then so that would delay you a little bit in terms of like 6 months. So it wasn't like you had this whole year like huge time gap. You would
yeah.
your ship and just try to go straight into kind of convert it, or like was the thought process do this junior summer and then what were you going to do if they gave you an offer to join a year later?
Uh, well, so no, so when I was interviewing, right, it was still the fall before even a junior internship from the investment banking perspective would have even happened, right? So as when my senior year started is when I started interviewing, but they categorized me as a junior because I put my graduation date a year after, right?
Got it.
So I was interviewing for that junior internship as a senior, having delayed my graduation date in order to even, I guess, be able to participate on that because I didn't think there'd be really a way to get in otherwise, right? At least not
No, it
kind of where
makes
I was.
sense. Yeah, the junior summer internship is kind of the window which you don't want to miss. So you're delaying your graduation enough so that you're kind of categorized as a junior, you get into that process. Tell me a little bit about how many, resume drops you made and then like what your conversions were with those two internships kind of now on your resume.
You mean as I was recruiting for a summer analyst position?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that that was still a really tough process for me, just in general. But I think
Like 20 resume drops and two first round interviews. Like what was it looking like? Or 10?
in terms of that, I guess I was getting actually really little traction across the board. I think I was just I wasn't really even submitting resumes. I guess I was, but not through HR. I was doing it solely through contacts or LinkedIn, where I'd reach out to somebody and somehow get them my resume and then pass it along to HR, and then I'd kind of apply to HR. But really, what I started doing was I just started booking flights to New York. Honestly, I'd go out there for a week during kind of school, right? And I would set up coffee chats with the people that I wanted that I connected with on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Um, and I think kind of that face-to-face connection just kind of it helped separate me from other people just pinging them on LinkedIn, and that's kind of where I started getting a lot more traction.
And there were not like resume drops at your school. There wasn't enough to actually get any first rounds or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone recruited at Georgia really, except for a few people.
A couple. Okay. So you're really hustling to do it yourself. And so you're actually flying up to New York and meeting with people. How many of those meetings do you feel like how many times you do that I'll put in quotes your senior year. So like a couple times that.
Yeah, so I did it once, which got me a few other or a few interviews, right? But what really helped me is once I got those few interviews, I followed up with people who I told that, or I tried to meet up with, and I told, or who I did meet up with, told them I'd got those interviews, and then they were able to get me interviews at their respective banks. So
You suddenly became the hot commodity.
I would say that it definitely helped, and it was a way in. Yeah.
Nice. Do you remember like what those initial interviews were like, or who they were with for the other bulge brackets boutique?
Um, yeah. So I guess, I'll give a few examples. One was Deutsche Bank. Someone I just reached out to, and then HR contacted me, and then they just brought me in. And it wasn't even in their sort of typical super day, format, right? It was just meeting with, I think HR lined up a few people. I met with all of them, and then that was my day. So it was around 5 interviews, 30 minutes apiece.
And you had no clue like what that meant in terms of like how long they were going to take to get back to you, or what? And what was the communication?
Um, no, well, they didn't say exactly when they'd get back to me because it almost felt very informal with that one specifically, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, they said they'd get back to me. They eventually did, and said Deutsche Bank didn't work out. Um, and then I continued to interview, and eventually I got an offer at UBS. But what also helped me a lot is I got an offer at UBS, and around that time during it, I also got an offer from SEO. I don't know if you're familiar with SEO.
Yes, I do know SEO. Yeah, the unrepresented minority program.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So it's search. What's it called? Like it's something.
Sponsors for
Sponsors
education.
for education. Thank you.
Stories.
Yeah, we work with SEO. They actually have a lot of mentor. We put like 200 of their. We did like 200 sessions of private equity interview prep for their people to help
Yeah,
them. Yeah, yeah. This past summer. So yeah, I know SEO well. So okay, so you got in there, and so that helped you a lot, right? Because that's like a channel.
yeah, exactly. Well, the same week I got both offers from UBS and SEO, and then what happened was SEO typically places you, but they ended up placing me at UBS because I was already kind of in there.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of the start.
Cool. Okay, and then let's talk about your time at UBS, the grind of banking. It's 16 to 18, 2016 to 18. So did you have a little bit of time off then before you started working? Or what did you do in those 6 months?
Yeah, so that was when I worked at Excel KKR for the 6 month
Oh,
kind of
you didn't
time.
even take a break. You went straight into another internship.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't want to make the same mistake twice.
Okay, so you stacked another internship and what was that like? Is it like a private equity internship? Is that hard to get? I assume.
Yeah, well, in Atlanta, there's aren't that many private equity firms. So I think maybe in Atlanta they typically are. I mean, people I worked with in New York, I feel like all of them kind of came into banking with one or two private equity internships. But yeah, I mean, that was sort of a similar situation. I ended up just reaching out to them, asking them if I could work for them, gave them my resume, and followed up a few times. And it just so happened they had hired, a few senior people that needed some, I guess, immediate support that they were recruiting an associate for. And so they're like, why not have some extra manpower? And so, yeah, I interned there for about 6 months before even starting full time at UBS.
Do you remember if it was paid?
It was paid $10 an hour.
Nice.
An hour now, I heard.
What is it now?
The internship there is 20 an hour now.
20. Nice. Very good. Okay. So you were there for a good 8 months. Do you feel like you learned a lot, or was it mostly like just organizing stuff, admin, or were you actually looking through Sims and stuff and looking at businesses?
Yeah, no, it was a little bit of both. I think at first it was more so kind of your traditional intern work where you're just kind of being passed down things that people just want to get out of their way. Um, but it did start to transition as I got to know people a little bit more into more meaningful work. And I think ultimately I got enough there. I got a good bit out of it to where I felt like, obviously I didn't have a true private equity experience, but I at least knew what I was talking about and could speak to like kind of process deals,
Did
rationale.
they let you sit in like on the investment committee meetings and stuff like that?
Yeah, they did.
That's cool.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's cool to see that at such a young age. Okay, so you're kind of going from that straight into your investment banking analyst stint at UBS, and what's it like right out of the gate? Are you you're going through training, you're trying to get up to speed? Do you feel like you had a lot to learn? Do you feel like it was easy because you had kind of the finance background, or what was it like?
Yeah, um, I'd say just kind of getting used to New York was, a big part of it. Just moving, but in terms of the job, I'd say that I came in with enough kind of of a foundational skill to be able to kind of hit the ground running per se. But I was still learning throughout the first 6 months. A ton. I mean, it's a ton of hours. You're working on live deals, and even with those internships, I'd say you're just kind of not thrown into the trenches in internships like that, right? And so you still kind of have a lot to learn when you start. But I did have at least a foundation that helps kind of facilitate that.
Was it like tough in terms of just getting used to the lifestyle of like living at the office?
So I was actually a bit surprised with hours.
It wasn't as bad.
Well, it was, and then it wasn't, right? It was only bad. I mean, it was bad for 2 weeks in a row, but I didn't understand that after that 2 week kind of, chaos, that you get kind of a week where everyone's taking off around 5, right?
Hmm.
And so it's just kind of ebb and flow like that. When you're working, you're really working, and when you're not at all. I mean, you're just kind of doing nothing all day.
Yeah, laundry around the office, a lot of
Yeah.
downtime. So tell me a little bit about just how things progressed. So it sounds like the first 6 months you were learning a lot. Things kind of plateaued a little bit in terms of your learning. It sounds like, was that why you kind of started looking, or what was the thought process? Was private equity on the horizon? Um,
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, this is, I don't even know if there's enough time in this podcast for this one, but
yeah.
it's a bit of a transition, or I guess a different path, right? I think I was about a year into, almost a year and a half into my analyst program at UBS, right? And I just needed to go back to Atlanta for to help out some family or deal some family things. And so I ended up having to leave my analyst program early. Um, and during that time, basically, I was going back to Atlanta, needed to kind of get my foot in the ground again. And I just reached out to Excel KKR, the same people I worked out worked out before, and for a position. Kind of told them again, moving back, this is going on, looking for a job. Do you guys have anything for me? Unfortunately, I built up some pretty strong connections during my internship to where things ended up working out.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's not always the case. I mean, look, that internship was a good 8 months before you started your banking stint. So
Mhm.
looking back, you're like, wow, I'm really happy I did that, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Because it led to that kind of seamless transition, or as seamless as it could be, right? Given the kind of, you had to cut your analyst stint short. So you're back home. You're working for Cell KKR. Kind of,
Right.
it looks like a little bit of consulting as well. They'd have a consulting practice there.
Yeah, yeah. So exactly. So I guess I'll back up a little bit because I think this is important too. During my second year of my analyst program, actually, I also got an offer from HIG in private equity. That's what I wanted to do, and because of the situation I just mentioned, I had to forfeit that as well. And so I did go to Excel KKR, albeit on their consulting team, because that's where more of the full time position was.
Yeah,
Uh, their entire team, the investment team, is pretty much in San Francisco too. Um, which was great because it was something, and I did give it a chance. But ultimately, my goal was still to do traditional private equity. Um, but yeah, no, that's exactly what I worked with their internal consulting team, so ex kind of McKinsey type guys, and very different work than what I was used to. But it was still good, and I learned a lot.
there's a little bit of a detour, if we're being
Yeah,
honest. It's a little detour because you had to be home. But that's, that happens, right? People are forced to kind of take a detour of necessarily where they want to go. The hard part is actually getting back on and not falling way off the track. Like you still had a related job.
yep, yep.
And so tell me how, kind of, once things were, you're able to kind of move again out of Atlanta. Tell me a little bit about how you thought about that next move. Why not go straight recruit to private equity, or did you try and it was just impossible and you had to go back to the banking route?
Yeah, so I guess I knew I wanted to do that or go into private equity, right? And I articulated that both to Excel KKR and headhunters, right? And so there are two paths there. The thing with Excel KKR is they, uh, I guess the thing, they hire in cycles like everyone else, and so it just seemed like there might have been an opportunity or there might have not, right? Just depending on if things opened up. And I didn't want to get pigeonholed into that consulting team. So I felt like I kind of needed to move now. Otherwise, otherwise there's not going to be a chance. I'm going to miss my window. So essentially, I recruited for both. Um, I guess I recruited for private equity first, right? Because obviously that's what I wanted to do. But I also recruited for banking, and just looked at groups that I thought were really strong that placed really well. And I guess the rationale for that was, I guess one, it helped kind of I guess it helped kind of put me back on that traditional timeline of the recruiting cycle, and with a more typical profile. And that's what I thought would help kind of make the transition back to private equity through PE a little bit easier.
For sure. Yeah. So tell me, like, so you started interviewing the PE, like, did you get to any final rounds with private equity shops, or how did that work?
Yeah, no, I was doing well. I mean, not well. I guess I got a few leads. I interviewed at Marlin, went to their final round, and then a few
What
other
about
firms.
what about the HIG offer that you had before? They weren't open at that point.
Yeah, it was kind of just water on the bridge, really.
Too late. Yeah. Oh man. That's got to be like a little bit disheartening. Like you make it through like all those processes and they're like, here's the offer, and you're like, I can't take it. And then like only a year and a half later, they're like, nope.
Yeah, it was also, I mean, incredibly difficult to explain the situation to headhunters, right? Because I'd say it's so unique compared to a lot of people, right? And so, just like now, they spend a lot of time trying to wrap their heads around, what was going
They're like,
on.
what are you doing? What are you doing? You're
Yeah,
going year and a half here, year and a half there. Yeah.
right,
Okay.
right.
Okay. So, but you're interviewing, you're kind of explaining your story, and then you end up at Lazard up in Boston, right? So tell me, um, you're just looking for a strong brand name, strong kind of placement into PE. Was a thought process like stay on the East Coast, or was there any thought process of Boston versus Atlanta versus New York? Because you've been now New York, Atlanta, Boston, and LA.
Yeah, yeah. New York was intentional. Atlanta was intentional. Boston was totally just by chance.
I won't
It
take
just
it personally, even though I got my Celtics hat on.
no, no, it's fine. Look, I like Boston, but I think especially moving around, the place you live is only as good as the people you know there.
Yeah.
And frankly, I just didn't know that many people in Boston. So, um, yeah, I guess I went there. I got what I went there for, and then I left. And I don't know if I'll ever be back.
So you're kind of when you start there, I mean, was Lazard at all? I mean, I think for any sort of lateral analyst, this is a concern. People hiring like they're hiring a lateral analyst spot because they're filling a spot that typically like they need filled.
Yeah,
Was there any like you promise you're going to be here for at least like 2 years or a year? Is there anything like that on the interview front that you had to like say for sure? Yeah, no problem.
yeah. There definitely was. That was a discussion. And I think for me, it wasn't something that like. You're an at will. It's an at will employer, right? So I guess you want to give people the word to the best of your ability, right? And so I think that's what I try to do. And I said, there's a version of me that wants to explore private equity, but I don't plan to just come here and leave immediately, right? And that wasn't my plan, right? And so, but it just ended up happening that way. And I think you got to be your own best advocate at times and do what's best for you. And so that's kind of what I ended up doing. And unfortunately, it meant that I left a little bit earlier than probably. I guess I didn't do quite a year there, but
Yeah, you didn't even get a bonus, right?
yeah, I didn't even get a bonus, get my bonus. So I mean, for them, maybe that was a good thing because I worked almost the full year and they didn't pay that out. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, so it's took didn't sting quite as much probably to them, but yeah. So you're kind of there for 9 months. What was it like just being in a complete, now in a what we'll call like an elite boutique? Was it very different from the UBS kind of framework? Were you like given more responsibility? How did you feel in terms of like the work life?
yeah, that's a really good question. So I thought Lazard, and it makes sense, right? If you look at league tables and everything, Lazard was a much stronger, I guess, at least the group I was in, a much stronger group.
Hmm.
Um, and I learned, when I got there, I started learning right away, and I think it really did help me kind of I mean, for the second time around, it also helped me interview for private equity, right? Because in banking, you can get caught in a group where you're just doing a lot of comps and updating Cap IQ and making presentations,
Yeah.
or you can get caught in a group where you're working on live deals, building an operating model, and doing real diligence, managing a process, right? And those are two very different experiences that set you up, you know, um, very differently. And I think I got much more of that at Lazard than UBS.
And you got that within the first like 4 or 5 months?
I got that within the first day.
Wow.
Well, not all of it, right? But I was on a deal as soon as I got there, and it didn't stop until I left.
Wow. Okay. So you're immediately getting thrown into live deals. And so tell me when things start ramping up for PE recruiting for where you're at now, but just was it like right away, or was it 6 months in that you started like headhunters started calling and stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think my plan was actually just to start interviewing for, on a more traditional cycle again. So 1 year out. And so I started reaching out to, headhunters about 6 months in, got them comfortable kind of where I'm at and told them, my preference would be to go on a traditional cycle, within a year, I guess, of then, I guess at that time.
Yep.
But as I was doing that, they kept passing along a bunch of immediate start.
Yeah. So they kept sending you immediate start stuff, even though you're
Exactly. And eventually I started biting, and yeah, now I'm here.
awesome. And long term, you thinking MBA? What's the goal? I know a lot of people don't want to go get the MBA. It's been devalued.
Yeah, when I first started banking, I did want an MBA. I thought there's, I guess, the chip on my shoulder. Um, I just wanted kind of a blue chip resume or blue chip kind of stamp of one of the big three business schools on my resume. But I think as I've started working, it just I've seen that it's become less and less valuable. It's more about kind of references and how you perform on the job. And I just don't see it being. I just don't see the ROI there anymore at all.
Talk to me a little bit about joining a new private equity shop in the middle of COVID. Do you feel like you know your team at all, or is it all Zoom? Have you ever met in person?
Yeah, this is the part you might have to cut. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I'd say it's certainly not the best way to start any job, I guess, right? I think with any job, there's always going to be a learning curve. And there's an aspect of camaraderie and getting to know people, things like that you only really get in an office. And when you start a job with COVID, you miss all of that, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's just much more difficult to ramp up, much more difficult to kind of find that natural mentor to who you can go to ask kind of those questions you wouldn't want to ask anyone else. Um, and yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, I guess overall, it's not. I wouldn't recommend it, but I mean, it's not all bad. I think it's still fine, right? It's just I think I certainly noticed that there were things that were more difficult to start or ramp up in than in previous jobs.
I can tell you, yeah, the first year analysts in banking are like quitting. Everyone's quitting right away.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's a high burnout rate um, from this past year, but things are getting better as things open up slowly. So
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't spoken to a ton of people about this, but I heard also banks are kind of adjusting their pay structure, right, to both, I guess, keep people and also get people more interested.
oh yeah, quick promotes, higher bonuses. Yeah,
Yeah.
they have an attrition problem. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, I think banks are getting a little more creative with what schools they're looking at. So I'm sure Georgia is going to get much longer look kids from there. Just because it's hard. They want people who are going to stick around for more than just like a year.
Right.
But anyways,
I don't know
any
if recruiting at any particular school is going to do that. I mean, but we'll see.
yeah, exactly. Like it doesn't mean if you get a kid from wherever that they're not also going to be interested in P.
Yeah, well, what I heard they're doing is, I guess when I was back in banking, it was more so 50-50 in terms of the cash to bonus split. But now it's more 80-20 or like 75-25 or
Oh, for
80-20.
the bulge brackets, more
Yeah,
stock.
right,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, that's painful. It's painful. But
No,
yeah.
in terms of they're getting more of their salaries paid as opposed to
Oh, it
their
is.
bonus.
Oh, yeah, yeah. That meaning higher base. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting, man. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. Well, anyways, I appreciate all the time you spent with us. Any final words of wisdom, kind of looking back at your path? I almost call it like you're very comfortable, almost carving your own path. Not only graduating a year later, but also doing the same thing when you had to get home and passing up a private equity offer. Like that's pretty rare.
Yeah, I guess you said words of wisdom.
Yeah, any final words of wisdom just looking back at your path? Like don't be afraid. Is the lesson here that we should take away like don't be afraid when it doesn't line up, the path doesn't line up perfectly like 2-2-2?
I guess I would say that, I think, well, one, I think you have to be self-aware to know what you're working with and kind of like if something's not, I guess clearly going to be very difficult to achieve, then maybe set smaller goals, but also For me, I think it was just important to stay persistent and really pursue what I wanted and give it kind of a meaningful effort and cover, make sure that I was getting in contact with people, doing the right networking, and also setting myself up to get to where I wanted to go. And I'd say that, yeah, it's just important to, because I guess thinking back into even my UGA days, right? Like, I remember talking to the school recruiter, and I kind of told her, I remember I went to Houlihan Lokey one day and I told her, yeah, I just went up there in a suit and asked them for an interview. And then she got a little bit kind of, I don't want to say frustrated, but she got a little bit concerned and that, that may have been a little bit aggressive and that she didn't want me to kind of, I guess, give, I guess, a bad brand to UGA if I did it the wrong way, right? Which I don't know if I did or didn't, right? But I think that you really just kind of have to, be your own best advocate and pursue what you actually want. And, people are standing in the way and still give it your best shot.
For sure. No, I like that. Yeah, don't be afraid of like doing it the wrong. It's more important to try, right? Than just to have to think of doing it perfectly or whatnot. And meeting people. It sounds like you learned early on to just be reaching out and be a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess it's just important to, I tell people this that I guess from UGA, it's just important to find ways to differentiate yourself when everyone's kind of doing the same thing.
For sure. Cool, man. Well, I appreciate your time. Thanks for spending it and sharing your wisdom.
Yeah, appreciate it. Take care.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick at wallstreetoasis.com. Until next time.